다 지나고 다시 보게 되는 그날 모든 걸 버리고 그대 곁에 서서 남은 길을 가리란 걸 인연이라고 하죠. 후회할 수가 없죠. 내 생에 이처럼 아름다운 날 또다시 올 수 있을까요? 고달픈 삶의 기회 당신은 선물인가 이 사랑이 녹슬지 않도록 내가 꺼내줄게요. 귀한 만남은 짧았지만 빗장 여러 살이했죠. 맺지 못한 대로 후회하지 않죠. 너무한 건 없으니까 운명이라고 하죠. 거부할 수가 없죠. 내 생에 이처럼 아름다운 날 또다시 올 수 있을까요? 하루도 말하지만 당신은 어신자죠. 먼길 돌아 만나게 되는 날 다시 놓지 말아요. 인생에 못한 사랑 인생에 못한 일에 먼길 돌아 다시 만나는 날 나를 놓지 마. 약속해요. 이 순간이 다 지나고 다시 보게 되는 그날 모든 걸 버리고 그대 곁에 서서 남은 길을 가리란 인연이
Oh. Hi, my name is Don Phillips, and I'm a librarian at the Milpitas Library. I do teen and adult services work, and I am so happy to have you all here tonight. Thank you. We're lucky. We have a great evening planned and on Zoom, and I think it'll be a feast for your senses, both sight and sound, and that you'll enjoy meeting our authors. We're going to do a brief look at the book trailer before we get into the meat of this, just in case you haven't seen it. It'll give you a kind of a hint of what's to come. So I'll let the trailer begin now. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So that gives you a little taste of what we have tonight. So I want to once again wish you good evening from the Milpitas Library, where I have as my background tonight, which would be where I'd usually be greeting you from. Welcome to Zoom and this virtual evening where we're going to be talking about the book Chinatown and the program From Suffering to Celebration, an intimate look at San Francisco's Chinatown. Our presenters are the photographer Dick Evans and the journalist Kathy Chin Leong. And I just wanted to go a little bit over their bios because it's interesting. According to what I've heard, it sounds like Dick Evans is the one who sort of began this project, and he collaborated with journalist Kathy Chin Leong. Now, Dick Evans is a San Francisco-based photographer with an interest in documenting the colorful and rapidly changing neighborhoods of the city. He was born into a ranching family in Oregon. He graduated as an engineer from Oregon State University and obtained a master's degree in management from Stanford. He has spent his 50-year career in the global metals sector, living in 5 countries and multiple locations in Africa, Europe, and North America. It was during these travels that he developed an appreciation for the diversity and richness of different cultures, both global and local, and an interest in documentary photography. Kathy Chin Leong, the writer of this book, is an award-winning journalist. She covers travels, technology, business, art, and architecture, and anything that piques her interest. Her writing has been published in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, National Geographic Books, Sunset Magazine, and other nationally recognized publications. Growing up in a bicultural environment, Chinese at home and American at school, she's typical of many of the people who struggle with identity issues and eventually learn to embrace their Chinese heritage. While she's traveled the globe to the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, rediscovering her Chinatown roots through collaboration on this book has been the journey of a lifetime. She lives in Sunnyvale, California, so both California residents exploring this local history here. And they're great to talk to. I know they're going to deliver a great evening for you, and I hope you all enjoy it. I'm very pleased to present Kathy and Dick tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Don. It's our pleasure to be here. And thank you to the Santa Clara County Library as well, and to all of you that have joined us tonight. I might just mention we will finish with time for questions and answers. So as we go through this, if you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make, just jot them on the either on the chat or the Q&A icons at the bottom of your screen. So let's start off with an iconic image of Chinatown, and it's perhaps what many of us think of and if we think of Chinatown in San Francisco. I would guess many of you being from the Bay Area, you've probably visited Chinatown. Some of you certainly have. And this is Grant Avenue, the main street going through Chinatown and one of the oldest streets in San Francisco. And you can see the architecture and the red lanterns. And when I would visit Chinatown in the 70s and 80s with our young daughters, I always assumed this was just historic Chinatown that was started this way and preserved this way throughout its history. But as I'm going to speak of in a minute, that's not necessarily the case. It's not a coincidence, too, that our choice for the cover of the book is one of these Grant Avenue building facades, a very elaborate Chinese architecture, colorful painting, red lanterns in front. This is a historical building that used to house a very famous restaurant called the Four Seas Restaurant. The sign has been preserved. It's even still outside on the Grant Avenue side. But the restaurant's not there anymore. However, inside there is a restaurant called Mr. Jew's, which is a modern upscale restaurant that was opened just 3 or 4 years ago, just before the pandemic, and is a Michelin-starred restaurant. So really an outstanding restaurant serving Chinese cuisine. Here's another shot of Grant Avenue. You see the historic streetlights and also the pagoda-style buildings, which again, I always thought were just the way Chinatown had grown up when it originated in the 1800s. But that was not the case. In fact, when it started in the 1850s, it was very much a low-income, low-rise, unsanitary, what we would probably call a slum or a ghetto. It was low-rent housing that the immigrants could afford and use, and it looked nothing like this. So how did this come about is the question. And I'm sure all of you know that in 1906, there was a major geological event, that is the major earthquake that hit San Francisco, with the result that many of the buildings collapsed. Those that didn't collapse were caught up in the fires, and much or most of downtown San Francisco was essentially leveled and then destroyed by the fires. And at that time, recovering from the earthquake, the city leaders tried to move the Chinatown residents to the outskirts of the city, to the Bayview or Hunters Point, as far out as they could move them. And the Chinese immigrant residents resisted that. And luckily, they were able to reach a deal with the city leaders that Chinatown would be reconstructed as both a tourist attraction and as a residential neighborhood. So the idea of a tourist attraction that would bring people and money to the city was the reason for this very elaborate Oriental style architecture. much of it designed and actually built by Caucasian architects and builders based on some input they had from Chinese architects and also pictures, photographs, drawings, and their perception of what Chinese architecture should look like. So this architecture is a bit over 100 years old. It was built, in the 1907 to 1915 period. And that's how we have this iconic style that's Chinatown. Now, in the early 50 years, it was a difficult period for immigrants. That first 50 years from 1850 up to the earthquake, they were discriminated against. They were discouraged from going outside of their own boundary area. They were not allowed to stake claims in the gold rush. They were used for menial tasks in the gold rush activities and then later in the railroads. And that did not end after the earthquake when it was created as a tourist attraction. It continued. There was a famous and very overt law in 1882 called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which openly and overtly prescribed how to basically discriminate against the Chinese immigrants. And that stayed in effect, or parts of it, and certainly the informal aspect of it, all the way up to the 1950s. So in that period after the earthquake, the Chinese immigration continued into San Francisco. And during that period, the incoming immigrants, Chinese and otherwise, were funneled through Angel Island in the Bay, which became similar to Ellis Island in New York, which is famous for all the European immigrants. And the Chinese immigrants were even separated and treated differently, discriminated against in their entry into California. And here you see a little writing here that's been taken from the walls of the detention centers on Angel Island. Many of the immigrants and detainees would carve their name or saying or poem or something into the walls, and those were later translated, captured and then translated. There's actually a book that has all of those inscriptions in the walls and then the translations to English. This one I think is particularly poignant if you look at it. He's mentioning that he's treated as a number. They don't use his name. And when they call you for an interrogation or something, they just post your number. And on the day that they let you go, your number is on the blackboard and it just says San Francisco. And note that this was the young man that did this was 11 years old, and in 1939. So this was, well after the 1800s and well after the earthquake, when this discrimination still existed. And even after the 50s, when things opened up, there was still some informal discrimination, some which we've seen come back, unfortunately, in the very current events with the COVID crisis. But during the 70s and 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, Chinatown and its residents still had to deal with discrimination and unequal treatment. Now, one area that became important to the residents was the Tiananmen uprising in China itself. Of course, they saw it on television. They may have had relatives or new people who were there. And if you remember, there was, in the news coverage of that, there was a statue about 50 feet tall, you may remember, was made out of wood and cardboard and paper. And this is a replica of the statue. This is what it looked like. This is only 10 feet tall, so a fifth the size, and it's made out of bronze. and it's located right in the center of Portsmouth Square, which is the founding location of San Francisco, in fact, and is also known as the heart of Chinatown and the living room of Chinatown. So it was erected here to celebrate and in remembrance of the student uprising in Tiananmen Square. Another sculpture that's in Chinatown with more contemporary meaning is this one from only about a decade ago. And it's called The Comfort Women. It's in St. Mary's Square. That's the Bank of America building, actually, right behind it that you see. And it was put up to celebrate and again recognize the young women and girls who were taken to be prostitutes and sex slaves by the Japanese army and government during World War II. And I'm sure many or most of you have heard about that. This statue has been controversial because the Japanese sister city of San Francisco, Osaka, was not pleased with this statue going up. And unfortunately, this resulted in a breakup in that relationship. Hopefully, someday in the future, that will get put back together. So as we mentioned, Chinatown has always suffered discrimination, has always been very aware of social justice issues. And for that reason, we like to say that its story is really one of resilience, survival, and celebration. And during the course of photographing and writing this book, Kathy interviewed over 100 people, businesses, groups to come up with some of the stories that are captured in the book. So, Kathy, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I am so excited to share with you these stories that really came out of my childhood as well. This is the most beautiful mural. It's called 100 Years of Chinese in America. It was created and commissioned for a man named James Leong, who was the artist. And he colored this in egg tempera, and it was so beautiful. But many Chinese criticized it because they felt, even though it was historically accurate, they felt it reinforced stereotypes, and they criticized him for that. And he was so hurt that he left to go to Europe and spent the remainder of his career in Europe. Years later, the 7-paneled piece of art was later discarded and it was lost. But then it was later recovered in a rec room. Parts of it were used as a ping pong table. And it was brought back to the CHSA, the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum, which is in Chinatown. And they contacted James Leong, who is now living in Seattle. And he came back and retouched this beautiful painting. And he was just honored and dignified in a very precious way. And that was great because a few years later, he passed away. In this painting, the same painting, you will see Sue Lee, who is a very recognized historian on Chinese in America. And why is this important? Well, she, as you'll see in this next photograph, she located a set of 12 watercolors that depict early Chinatown in San Francisco. And like a detective, she recovered a set of these 12 extremely rare watercolors by the late Jake Lee. And these works once hung in the Elegant Khan's restaurant in Chinatown. And after Khan's was sold in the 1990s, the paintings mysteriously disappeared until Sue hunted them down and collected them all together.
The biggest cultural event of the year in Chinatown, of course, is Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year. It is a week or 10-day long celebration. It culminates in a parade, usually a mile-long parade with all kinds of dragons, lion dancers, firecrackers, as you see in this photo, look down the lower right, You can see the remains of some of the firecrackers. And it's a huge celebration. It's been going on for decades. It's prior to the pandemic, is attended by hundreds of thousands of people annually. Unfortunately, this year, there will not be a parade, so very unfortunate. The good news is there will be a virtual parade. They're actually pulling together highlights of some of the prior parades. So there will be a virtual video parade and celebration taking place on February 20th of this year. Lunar New Year starts on February 12th, so it's coming right up very soon. You see here the dragons being carried, a couple dragons being carried along the way. In the next slides, you'll see a couple of young elementary school, so 13, 14-year-old boys dressed up in Monkey King outfits, and they are stilt walkers. They walk on stilts that are like 6 feet up in the air, and they walk that full mile-long parade route as stilt walkers. This young woman as well, dressed up in this very traditional costume, is also a stilt walker. Now, these two photos I might mention were taken before the parade down in the staging area. And just a hint, if any of you go to the parade in future years and you want to take photographs, go down to Market Street where the floats and the participants are all staging an hour or an hour and a half before the parade. You can get fantastic photographs. You can talk to the participants. And it's just much easier to get up close, talk to them, learn things about the parade, and get some fantastic photos. This year is going to be the year of the ox. And here you have a picture of an ox. Because there's no parade this year, the organizers decided to commission 11 sculptures of oxen and plant them at different locations around San Francisco. So there's actually a map. I think you can go online, find a map that shows where they are. This one happens to be in Chinatown. I was down there last week and took this photo. This is in Portsmouth Square. But the others are not in Chinatown. They're scattered nearby around in various locations. Now, the ox is known as being, the people who are the year of the ox are known for hard work, perseverance, and honesty. So if you're born in the year of the ox, which would be this year, of course, but every 12 years going back, so the prior year would be 2009, you have some very good characteristics to live up to in terms of being a year of the ox birthday. And of course, the Lunar New Year is not the only celebration. There are a number of other celebrations throughout the year. This is just a picture of one of the others. This is the Moon Festival, which takes place in the fall and is not as big as the Lunar New Year Festival, but is a very well celebrated, colorful festival. This is the moon goddess and her counterpart, the moon god. And it's actually a woman named Maggie Wong who has been playing this role for about the last 20 years and has told me she's going to retire, but I won't believe it until I actually see it.
Here's Chinatown's newest mural of Bruce Lee. And if he were alive, he would be 80 years old today. Now, Bruce Lee changed the lives of many Chinese boys and men when he came on the scene in the late 1960s as the first Chinese action hero. Now, prior to that, Chinese were depicted in films and in TV as extras, houseboys, evil emperors, and the like. So when he came on the scene, it was really a breath of fresh air. If there were any Chinese that were a lead role, they'd be played by Caucasians with their eyes taped. and their voices speaking in broken Chinese English accents. This man on the left is Jeff Chin. Bruce Lee changed his life. When Jeff was a little boy, he was picked on because he was Chinese. One night he looks at a poster in his bedroom of Bruce Lee, and he believes and senses that Bruce Lee actually reached out to him and told him, "Jeff, everything is going to be okay." Well, that night just changed his life. He told Bruce Lee that Bruce would one day be proud of him, and I think he would. Jeff is now the proud collector and one of the top collectors of Bruce Lee memorabilia, from original costumes to all types of magazines and models after Bruce Lee. His collection has traveled to the far reaches of the world, to the Smithsonian Institute, and it will be on display hopefully this fall at the Chinese Historical Society Association History Museum, and that is in Chinatown. So look for it this fall. It'll be quite the treat. Now we're here at Skylawn Memorial Cemetery, and this is during the season of Qingming, which is a festival honoring dead ancestors. Every year, Chinese groups come by the busload to honor Qingming. Here you see these beautiful manicured premises where Dick and I were escorted via golf court. And what's really interesting is nowadays, Chinese can pick wherever they want to be buried. But back in the 1800s, Chinese were not allowed to be buried in the same cemeteries as white people, and they had to have their own cemeteries outside the city of San Francisco.
Kathy mentioned Kung Fu in relation to Bruce Lee as a martial arts, a Chinese martial arts. Another Chinese martial art, of course, is Tai Chi, which many of you may know and is quite popular for exercises. In a way, it's quite similar to yoga for many people. During the course of this book project, we learned that there is an annual International Tai Chi Day. And we found that out a few weeks before that day. So we went to our cultural partner in this project, the Chinese Culture Center in Chinatown, and asked if they would help us organize some Tai Chi performers, or at least participants, not necessarily performers, but participants for International Tai Chi Day. And for our part, we offered to have free tea, pastry and cookies in exchange for those who would allow us to photograph them on the Kearny Street Bridge performing Tai Chi and taking an hour-long class in Tai Chi. As you can see, the young woman in the front is the Tai Chi instructor. So she was taking everyone through their paces. We were able to photograph them on the bridge. We also happened to run into a Tai Chi master, or Sifu, as they're titled. This is Xu Fen Xiao, and we ran across her because we were photographing and interviewing her husband, who owns an herbalism shop, together with her. And we were taking his photo. You'll see him a little bit later when we show some of the businesses in Chinatown. We saw these huge trophies up on top of the herbal shelves. So we asked, where did those come from? And he explained that was his wife's Tai Chi trophies from all the events she's competed in. So we asked if she would be willing to come back and maybe go around Chinatown with us and let us take some photos as she demonstrated various Tai Chi poses. So this is how we got a whole collection of images of her around Chinatown.
Now we're here in Chinatown, also at the Far East Cafe, which unfortunately closed at the end of December due to the pandemic. But before that, it was 100 years old and was really famous for offering red egg and ginger parties. So for those of you who don't know, Red Egg and Ginger Party is a celebration for a 1-month-old Chinese baby. And here we have the family of the Tongs, and we have baby Rose. The red eggs represent fertility, and the ginger would represent fertility and strength. And so we're really pleased to be there. Another tradition is the passing of red envelopes during Chinese New Year. You always give 2 to represent double happiness. And this is my adorable nephew, Tyler, who goes to Laurelwood Elementary School in Santa Clara. Now, traditionally, when an engaged girl is about to get married, she'll order a cheongsam, a very fitted Chinese gown. And it is always a special thing to get because you have it tailored especially for your figure. Now, the Chinese tea ceremony is a revered custom, and very few Chinese couples are doing it today, but we found Leanna and her husband Michael here who were participating in a Chinese tea ceremony. Typically what you do is you have the couple kneel before their elders. They pass them tea, and in turn the elders will give them cash and jewelry. Now, brides are not the only ones who get jewelry. A woman who reaches a certain age will decide it's time to bestow her jewelry to her daughter, daughter-in-law, granddaughter, or other women in her life. Now, Chinese jewelry is unique because it's not just ornamental. In the old days, gold and jade amulets were believed to ward off evil spirits. And they were also collected to be bartered during times of war when things got really rough. Here's one of my most favorite murals, which unfortunately has been taken down. But I love it because you have this young modern Chinese girl walking past a traditional Chinese tailor shop. And she's wearing modern clothes, but yet on her wrist is a traditional jade bracelet, probably given by her mom or grandmother. And she's slinging a bag of oranges over her shoulder. Oranges represent gold and prosperity. And a pink Chinese box is the quintessential Chinese bakery box that usually carries treats like custard tarts and special cakes. So that's why it's one of my favorites. Here's our family enjoying dim sum, and in Chinese it's called yum cha. And a typical Chinese family will go to Chinatown or around the South Bay to have dim sum, which opens up as early as like 9 or 10 in the morning in some places. And I find that chicken feet and gizzards are not unusual dishes. They're just really common. And we invite you to post some of your favorite dim sum if you would like to on the chat box.
Chinatown has a very strong sense of community, as you might expect, because of the discrimination and the challenge that it's had over the years. So it's no surprise that you find that strong community spirit. I think there are probably more community nonprofits in Chinatown per capita than any other neighborhood in San Francisco. This is a shot of Portsmouth Square, which I mentioned is considered the living room and the heart of Chinatown. On this day, the women were playing cards out in the sun, and as they typically do in Portsmouth Square, and we had a rain outburst just came over and really poured. I figured they would fold up their hands and call it a day, but instead they kept their hands. They just took out their umbrellas and they moved to the protection of the gate there on the entrance to Kearny Street Bridge, and continued without missing a beat. Another sense of community spirit is seen when you visit the family benevolent associations, of which there are many, many. This happens to be one just a block or so from Portsmouth Square. We were lucky to get invited by a member to go in on a weekend morning and see how the members utilize that facility. And as you can see here, playing mahjong, playing cards, playing Chinese checkers, reading Chinese newspapers, and just visiting with friends is a very popular thing on the weekends in the benevolent associations. We also found out that there is a Miss Chinatown USA pageant each year. And we wondered why there is a separate Miss Chinatown pageant. Why not just participate in Miss America, Miss California, or other pageants? And we learned in the course of this that the history is, unfortunately, that for decades, young women were discriminated against if they were ethnically Chinese or from Chinatown, and could not participate in some of those pageants. So being resilient as they are, the community of Chinatown founded its own Miss Chinatown pageant. It's now open to young women from Chinatowns all around North America. And this one happens to be from San Francisco, but others have been from other Chinatowns. The event is actually held in San Francisco because San Francisco's Chinatown is the oldest Chinatown in North America and is also the founder of the event. This Miss Chinatown, we were very pleased to learn, is a very bright student going, I think it was into biomedical engineering at Rice, also working with bilingual students in elementary school. But on top of all that, she's a world-class archer, as you see her here with her bow, and had hoped to compete in the Olympics and unfortunately was not able to, of course, because of the pandemic. There are other institutions that we discovered in Chinatown that are there really because the services were not available, or these organizations were not open to Chinese outside of Chinatown. So they formed their own organizations, in this case being the YMCA, which has been a very successful institution and a beloved institution in Chinatown now for decades. And another one is the Chinese hospital, which I believe Kathy was born in the Chinese hospital, she told me, and Bruce Lee was also born in the Chinese hospital. But you might ask, for a population of only 20 to 25,000, do you need a separate hospital? And of course, the answer is the Chinese were historically not welcome to use medical facilities outside of Chinatown. That's one point. And secondly, there was none of the traditional Chinese medicines or herbs available outside of Chinatown. So today, they're very fortunate to have this beautiful, relatively new hospital. And this happens to be the donor wall of all the people that came together to make that happen.
Here we have a typical single room occupancy apartment complex. Imagine your home is the size of a closet shared with 4 or more people. This is SRO living. Here you have no access to washers or dryers, so you have to hand wash and you have to hold your laundry outside to dry every time you want to clean your clothes. We were really privileged here to be a part of the scene. This is Norman Fong, who was former head of the Chinatown Community Development Center, and they were in charge of several SRO buildings. One day when he was giving us a tour, a young girl came up and wanted him to come up to visit her grandmother. She was too ill to walk down the stairs to go to the doctor. Again, there are no elevators in these places. So this is the SRO room where she lives, and he came and said a prayer for her. And we were very privileged to be able to stand outside and take a photo. It was a very precious moment. This is the Dragon boat racing team. And if you are lucky to be part of the Community Youth Center, your practice time, your uniforms, your dragon boat is absolutely free. This is a wonderful organization called CYC that helps at-risk youth. This is Bella Chen, who previously to joining this team said she was completely unathletic, and now she is the head team captain. You know, it used to be when I was small, it was not very cool to display your heritage. In fact, it was shameful. But now I'm really pleased to report that kids now are really encouraged to be proud of their heritage. And this is little Yuhan Chen, who during a Chinese New Year festivity, Chinese New Year party, she was practicing and for the first time did Chinese calligraphy. I'm also proud of my nephew Tyler and other kids now who are really open about trying new things. Tyler here is trying out dragon beard candy, which is made from a block of maltose syrup and pulled and pulled and pulled into thousands of threads. Unfortunately, dragon beard has also gone out of business due to the pandemic, but I believe if you go and see the actual building, Derek, who's the owner, is making them custom orders. These are buildings for family associations, and they're very colorful. Back in the 1800s, when you first came to Chinatown as a foreigner, you would look up your family village and your last name, and you would find your family association, and they would set you up with housing and a job. Now today, many of these still exist. There are at least 200 different family associations in Chinatown, and you can see their names, and they're very proud of their beautiful colors. And these are all green and red and yellow. Those are all good luck, prosperity colors in Chinese culture. In many of these places, you'll see an ancestral altar. Now, these places are very rare to get into if you don't belong to the association. Now, because Dick and I knew someone who was part of one association, he was able to get permission from their board to let us in and take pictures. So these pictures that you see here and in the book are very rare behind the scenes photos. Here you see a scene from King of the Yis. This was a play written by American-born Chinese Lauren Yi, who wrote and cast this production about Chinese family associations. This is the largest one of all, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of America, otherwise known as CCBA. This consists of at least 20,000 members around the United States and Canada. Now you see most of the people in charge are men, and so the problems that are facing them for the future is the fact that many of their sons do not want to become a part of the family association, and women are not allowed to be in the top leadership. The women have their own groups. So what's going to become of these is still up in the air, and it'll be a big question mark 20 years from now, what happens with these associations. In October, we lost the matriarch of Chinese cooking. This is the famous Cecilia Chang, who is pictured here with her great-grandchildren. Now, Cecilia Chang was the founder of the Mandarin restaurant in Ghirardelli Square. Back in the day, it was the most lavish, and the first true fine dining Chinese restaurant in the area. Herb Caen made her famous with reviews in the San Francisco Chronicle, and she had enjoyed a beautiful career. Her son, Philip, started the chain P.F. Chang's, which is all over the world. Here you see Chinese school. Back in the 1800s, many parents who came to America were worried that their children would lose their culture and their language. So many family groups started Chinese schools, which exist until today.
Now, music and dance, of course, is also an important part of Chinese culture. And I was lucky to be invited to go backstage 3.5 hours before the Chinese opera performed and take photos of the performers putting on their makeup and putting up the props. Here you see a young man putting up the backdrop for the opera. It was really quite interesting to see how the makeup goes on over a 3-hour period. It's a very elaborate process. And when you see the final result, as you do in this next photo, or near final, you're still putting on the finishing touches, you can appreciate much more the performance when you see the final act in the performance. So we had quite a number of photos from behind the scenes of getting ready for the opera, which are somewhat unique to see what takes place. Another form of music and dance, which is quite different, is exhibited by a group called the Grant Avenue Follies. This is a group of women today in their 70s and 80s. But they had, in their 20s, they had been dancers in Chinatown, performing in burlesque shows and other song and dance performances. They were organized a few years ago by Cynthia Yee, who brought the group together, formed the Grant Avenue Follies, and they put on these performances similar to what they used to do 50 years earlier. And I have to tell you, they are incredible. And as you can see here, dance into your 60s and 70s is certainly an excellent way to stay in terrific shape.
Now, moving a 10-pound lion head is another way to stay in shape. You have to practice, I'm told, because if you don't practice, you will not last an entire parade. So your arms will get really tired and they'll give out on you. This is Corey Chan, and we call him the Lionhead Whisperer. And for over 40 years, he has been restoring broken lion heads and giving them back their roar. He never went to school for anything like this. He's just self-taught. He replaces eyelid strings used for blinking. He glues on new fur, and he paints over scratches until the whole lion looks just like new. When I interviewed him, he said that after the repairs, the new memories come back to the lion. So when you see these, you can see how gorgeous they really are.
And this picture, I might mention, is in his garage. His car is parked outside and his garage is full of repaired lion heads. Certainly passionate to his art. So for many of us, I don't think a visit to Chinatown is complete unless we make a stop at a restaurant or a bakery or one of the food markets. And I know over my 3-year period, I would seldom get out of Chinatown without dim sum or a bakery stop. There is even a best-selling book out there called The Woman Who Ate Chinatown, the San Francisco Odyssey, by the late Shirley Fong Torres, who is a sister of Ben Fong Torres, quite well-known journalist and TV personality. Now, many people have their favorite local establishment like this one, and as you can see, roasted ducks are very typical, hanging in the window. And even in some newer restaurants, the roasted ducks are still there, as you see in this next image, which happens to be in China Live, which is a very new, upscale, wonderful, large restaurant that is a very contemporary, yet with a nod to tradition as well. This is a kitchen at China Live, as you can see, immaculate modern kitchen where they're preparing the meals. They have giant steamers like you see in this next photo where they're doing the dumplings right out where you can watch while you're eating. And also in the kitchen, you have this giant chocolate mousse mixer, which certainly intrigued me. In addition to China Live, and I mentioned Mr. Jew's, the restaurant that is a Michelin-starred restaurant on Grant Avenue. This is a shot into the kitchen of Mr. Jew's. And then you see one of their presentations of very elegant, I guess you could say maybe minimalist, but very attractive upscale presentation of their food. There are also younger chefs coming up, like Kathy Fang here, who's won a number of awards, whose parents still run a restaurant in Chinatown. She grew up working in that, a very traditional restaurant, but she has founded her own restaurant, appropriately called Fang's, which is more contemporary. And as I mentioned, she's won quite a number of cooking awards as well.
And you still have the older guard in Chinatown. This is a happy employee at Mao Li Xing Qi, and it's a business of dried meats and poultry. And the business is over 100 years old, spanning 7 generations. For me, when I see this, I don't think it's scary. I think it's delicious. I love it because when I stayed at my grandmother's house, her studio apartment near Chinatown, Popo would steam this over rice for breakfast. This is Coffee Crunch Cake. An Eastern bakery is only one of 2 bakeries making this famous confection in San Francisco, and the other bakery is in Japantown. So you can decide which cake you like more. This is Stockton Street, and it's known as the locals' Chinatown. Every day at 4 p.m., little grandmothers emerge from their apartments for produce on sale. And the market sellers will say, yep bun, yep bao, $1 one bag. And there's one thing that unites Chinese through the generations is that we all love a good bargain. Now these are not just ordinary dried roots and fungi. These are ingredients for a healthy family soup. So you take a fistful of this and a fingerful of that, and soup can clear acne, fortify your qi, and improve your circulation. And a traditional Cantonese mother will cook a soup every day for her family. But unfortunately, I am not a traditional Cantonese mother.
So let me give a heads up to Dawn now. In 2 minutes, we're going to be ready to go into Q&A. So if you've had a chance to monitor some of the questions that have come in while we've been talking. So the last section here are just some slides on the small family businesses in Chinatown, which are really the heart and the lifeblood of Chinatown's economy. There are many entrepreneurs in all walks of life, and not to make a bad pun because this is the walk shop here. But starting with this one, this is Tain Chen, who's now 83 years old. She's run this business for several decades, and she claims to sell the most walks between Hong Kong and New York City, west to east. But very entertaining, as you can see, well-stocked shop. It's just a delight to stop into her store, talk with her, get educated on walks. I mentioned earlier that we found a Tai Chi master when we were interviewing an herbalist. And here is that herbalist. So that's the husband of the Tai Chi master at his herbalist shop. Of course, you also have a florist in Chinatown, like you see here. You have studio photographer, you have an acupuncturist, where Kathy and I were able to go in the back rooms where they also mixed up some of their herbal remedies to go with the acupuncture, and to watch him perform acupuncture on his wife. We had volunteered Kathy, but insurance liability, he said, prevented him from doing anyone other than his wife. And some of the other small businesses cater especially to tourism, as this one does, a tea tasting. There are several tea tasting rooms, businesses in Chinatown, and when they open back up, it's a delight to go there, and the variety of tea they have is just incredible. And they will teach you about how best to steep it and how to taste it and how to use it. Another traditional shop that caters to tourism are the jade carving shops and antiquity shops that have been hit especially hard by the pandemic because they really rely so heavily on tourism business. Now, just like in the restaurant scene, there are also some emerging new, very contemporary shops, such as this one, which is the gift shop at China Live. This is Cindy Chan, the wife of the chef, and Cindy curated and runs the gift shop at China Live. And she's brought a fabulous collection of very high quality and unique items, particularly related to cooking and food, from all over the world, and has them there in the gift shop. It's a delightful place to shop for some really unique and high quality things. And another modern boutique is one called Kim Plus Ono, a play on the word kimono. And Kim Plus Ono is a shop that features handcrafted and hand-painted silk garments. So you see hand-painted silk kimonos, blouses, other garments. But again, very contemporary, very popular with the younger crew. Here's another shot from Kim Plus Ono. This happens to be from last year at the Moon Festival, and they held an event called Crazy Rich Asians Lookalike Contest during the Moon Festival, and this was one of the gals that came dressed in that regard, looking over the, as I mentioned, like the blouses or kimonos that you see there. So I'm going to end with this shot, which is the back cover of the book. It's actually a mural. It's in a dim sum restaurant called Dim Sum Corner, a new restaurant right on California and Grant Avenue, and is serving takeout, I know, because I got it recently. Does a terrific job with it. But this mural caught our eye because it really captures a combination of a very contemporary vibe with the graphic artist style of the mural, the modern camera, but then the very traditional red dress. So we see this as a good image of the modern Chinatown today. One nod toward traditionalism, but also looking ahead in a very confident, forward-looking manner toward the future. So with that, Don would be more than happy to take a few questions. I might mention here's you see the book website. There's quite an extensive website if you want to learn more, and more than is in the book as well, if you just go to ChinatownBooksSF.com. Don, over to you.
Hey, thanks so much. I missed the sound of applause at the end of a presentation like that, and you guys were great. I just wanted to, and thank you so much for letting people know about the chat option during this. I also wanted to mention that this project is a nonprofit venture, and all the book revenues go to the Chinese Cultural Center of San Francisco and Heyday Books, which is also a nonprofit organization, and they're both in the Bay Area. So a commendable thing, and I felt like it was important to make sure it got into this presentation. So thank you for that. And there are a ton of questions. So I will go through them with you as long as you guys have the stamina here.
Sure.
Okay. One was somebody was wondering about the name of the living room of Chinatown, and they thought it was called Portsmouth Square, and they were wondering where that was located in Chinatown. What street is it on?
Yeah, Portsmouth Square is between Kearny and Grant and between Clay and Washington. So it's right next to Kearny Street. There's a parking garage underneath it called I think it's Chinatown parking or Kearny Street parking. And it's Portsmouth Square parking. Thank you, Kathy. And it's right across the street from the Hilton Hotel. There's actually a bridge that goes from the Hilton Hotel from the Chinese Culture Center, which is on the third floor of the Hilton Hotel. There's a bridge that goes, a pedestrian bridge that goes across to Portsmouth Square. So it's pretty easy, and you can park in the Portsmouth Square parking. Just take the elevator right up to the park level, and you're right in the center of Chinatown.
Yeah, very helpful, and for those of us who want to visit. Somebody else was asking if there's a biography from the early Chinese settlers that you could recommend or know about.
I can recommend something. Here's a really fun one. This is called Growing Up in San Francisco's Chinatown. And there's a lot of memories by this one author who just talks about what it was like growing up, the times of the gangs, the times of really the heyday of Chinese movie theaters and restaurants. So it's called Growing Up in San Francisco's Chinatown, and it's a fun read.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm actually writing it down for myself. Thank you.
And here's one more that's maybe more of a reference document, but I don't know if you can see it here. There we go. It is called San Francisco Chinatown, A Guide to Its History and Architecture. And it's written by Philip Choi, who has passed away, but was a major contributor and driving force behind the Chinese Historical Society and the museum. And it has a lot of very good information. And one other very recent book that may be of interest is one about Donaldina Cameron, for which Cameron House is named. And she was a nun who rescued many of the young Chinese women from prostitution and then educated them. And it's called The White Devil's Daughters. And it's been a good seller in the last couple. It came out about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. Wow, those are all good resources. Thank you so much.
They're excellent books. I use them for my research too.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much. I think I'm going to have some reading to do soon, some extra. So somebody else asked about the oxen display and if it would be displayed permanently or only for this year. Do you know?
I don't. I have a feeling that it'll stay a few years. That's just my sense. You may recall a number of years ago, San Francisco, I think, had a number of painted hearts, right, that were all over the city that are still there, or at least many of them are. They were sponsored by different businesses, and so those have stayed up. And these sculptures are, nice, attractive-looking sculptures, all hand-painted and all different. So I'm just guessing they're probably going to be up for a few years. But if you were to Google them online, I think you could find a map I know it was in the Chronicle just a couple days ago that has the location of all 11 of them.
That's cool. Yeah, we used to have sharks in San Jose. It was
Right.
our thing. Anyway, maybe a little less profound though. So there were several questions about the family associations in Chinatown, and one of them was, what happened to the people whose names didn't match a family namesake? Like if they didn't have one, did the other associations maybe help them out, or were they asked to leave because the name didn't fit in? Do you guys know what happened in that particular case?
Well, usually the family associations, there would be like 3 or 4 names, like Li, Fong, Toy. So it'd be like they would group together. And also, you would look for your village. So if you couldn't find your name, you'd find the name of your village, which would probably fall in there. And then if you couldn't find that, you'd find the trade that you in, like if your family was a flower grower or if they were shoemakers. So you would find it. You would find it. They wouldn't turn you away.
Right, you'd find something.
Yeah, your village, right? So
yeah, right. So there would be a way. So and that sort of answers the next question, which was about the paper sons who bought or borrowed another last name, and did they go to the family association for their real name or their bought name, or how did the associations help them? I think it sounds like they had several options there.
Probably go to the association for your real name, your family name, family given name.
Yeah, and since we're on that one, I know there was one more. Okay, and this last one. How many family associations are in Chinatown, and how do I find out if my family has one? Yeah, and they were wondering because their family maybe came through Angel Island. Not sure if that means what that means as far as associations, but anyway, so certainly you've opened up an area of inquiry for at least a few people here.
Well, there's more than 200 family associations in Chinatown. And to find yours, I would start with the Chinese Historical Society of America, chsa.org. And they've done a lot of workshops. They've even had affiliations where they would have tour groups actually gather together and go back to the actual village in China. So they would have some really good resources for people who want to find their family association. I would start with them.
That sounds great. And that's chsa.org. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Just want to put that in there because, maybe there's more than one person. That sounds fascinating. Okay. Curious about how the history of North Beach compares to Chinatown in San Francisco. Did North Beach follow a similar pattern of development and reconstruction after 1906? I know that's sort of beyond the scope of this, but I don't know if you guys have a ballpark or if we could just say not sure about that one.
Well, just judging by the architecture of North Beach, the Victorians were built after the earthquake. The Victorians all across San Francisco were built and were designed from kits, basically. You wouldn't necessarily know this from the facades because they're different facades, but they were basically 4 or 5 different layouts, room plans, and then you would add different kinds of facades onto them. So just judging by the Victorians and so on, and the fact that the 1906 earthquake really did destroy much of San Francisco, I have to assume most of the architecture in North Beach is post-earthquake as well. Or maybe there's someone else on the call who is a historian or knows that better, but that would just be my guess. Okay,
thank you. Let's see. Does the CCBA also include the Caribbean where there is a huge Chinese presence? Do you know?
I don't know, but if there's Chinese there, they're probably be a CCBA. So, or it would be part of the their your last name. I don't know about the Caribbean. I really don't. Sorry.
And I don't want to bring controversy into this too much, but the next question is, do you have an opinion about what the best restaurant in Chinatown is?
Dick, you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I will give you several. I think I mentioned China Live. There's also a special restaurant, which I've not eaten at, part of China Live upstairs called 8 Tables. And it's a prefix menu that you can, if you have $300 to spend on a dinner, then I think that's probably worth doing. I've heard it's fabulous.
Yeah, I heard too. That one. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one. Mr. Jew's, as I mentioned, has a Michelin star. Kathy and I had lunch there the other day with Betty Louie, who happens to actually own the real estate in which Brandon Jew has his restaurant. It's fabulous. Others, you don't have to go upscale. Those are two of the most upscale. But Dim Sum Corner, new, great variety of dim sum, very well organized. Those would be 3 I think of. Kathy, what are some of the others that you would?
City View is a traditional dim sum restaurant, and that's really good. And I also liked New Asia, but right now they turned themselves into a produce market, and hopefully they'll transform back into a regular dim sum Chinese dinner hub. And X and Y restaurant is wonderful for Sichuan cuisine, especially the spicy crab. Really good. Really
Right.
good.
There's a picture of the spicy crab, I think, in the book. I think it's Z and Y, isn't it?
Z and Y.
Yeah. X, Y, Z, those never. Yeah, Z and Y Cafe and then Z and Y Bistro, which is across the street and is more of a casual lunch spot. And maybe it's worth mentioning, some of you who are of my age may remember the Empress of China, which used to be on the top floor of a building right on Grant Street, which closed, it must be 10 years ago now. There is an effort in the works to reopen a restaurant in that location, in that building. And I understand it's quite well advanced and it's with a well-known chef. And if that one does open up after the pandemic, that undoubtedly will be something very nice and unique to go to.
Yeah, and I see somebody in our in the chat said House of Nanking. If I'm pronouncing that right, was
Yes,
a recommendation by them.
Right.
And that is the parent restaurant, Fang, the young lady.
Kathy Fang's parents.
Ah,
Yeah,
Right.
that's where she learned to cook.
very cool.
Fang King, yeah.
Okay. Someone else was asking, and this is sort of in the, and please stop me if you guys are done with this. We can go on for a while here, I think. But somebody else wanted to know the name of the restaurant or the address where they can order the Dragonbeard candy. They didn't quite catch it in the audio.
You know what? Dragonbeard Candy went out of business. So they can try to go online. I don't know if he's got a website, but his name is Derek Tam. And I'll try to find out. And what I can do, I guess, Don, I guess I could email you that information and you could put it out there after the session's over if you have emails to people. So if you want to, yeah.
And I see, it looks like maybe it's time to wrap up, even though we didn't get to all the questions. I know people are starting to drift away. So I know that there are people that thought this was wonderful and want to know where they can see it again. And I know we are recording this for YouTube, and SCCLD will be putting it on their YouTube channel for sure. And that should be happening either later this week or next week.
Great.
I don't know. Do we want to do one more?
Sure. One more.
Go for it, Don.
Okay, let's see.
I have nothing else to do. Nothing else to do tonight.
Let's see. Thoughts on when the San Francisco Chinatown would reopen? That's a tricky one, obviously. Maybe not the best question, but maybe I had that question myself. It's like I was wondering what's going on there right now.
Yeah. I was there about 3 or 4 days ago, actually taking photos of the ox and some of the curio shops that are carrying oxen and also the streets. It is starting to reopen now with the outdoor dining. That was shut down. Many of the restaurants do have outdoor dining. They've all had or not all, but many have had takeout. And I was pleased to see that many of the shops are open now too, like the walk shop and a number of the curio shops and souvenir shops and gift shops and so on. And the traffic was not too bad. I mean, there were a fair number of people there, and certainly the food markets were busy. So with the California rate coming down significantly, and the outdoor dining reopening and the shops being open, it certainly is not back to normal, but it's starting to feel like it's headed toward normal again. So let's just hope that the rates stay down. Not only Chinatown, but other parts of the city are able to open. And if that trend continues and the vaccinations get rolled out and so on, I think in a couple months you're going to see Chinatown back and predominantly open.
And I just wanted to note that Chinatown was never hit badly during the whole coronavirus. They were
from a health standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, economically, yeah.
Yeah, economically bad, but health-wise, there was no real big outbreak, and which was really amazing because the people were very careful, and they got the word out in the Chinese newspaper and made many announcements to the residents, which are mostly senior, which was really wonderful.
Yeah, and and a tribute too, because we all know, like in a city where people are like living in such close proximity to each other, it's there's a lot of ways for that thing to spread. So that speaks even more. And I feel like that's a good positive place maybe to leave this, huh? Well, thank you so much. I know we didn't. I apologize for the questions we did not get to, but I think we covered most of the big ones. And thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Great. Thank you for
our pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.